Yes! Get into it! Yes! We're back! Hi, lovelies, we're back. Told you I'll read this epilogue. It's not that long because it kind of sets up the game for our next book, which will be starting on Monday. Because we're going to breeze through this series. It's not that long of a book series. Okay. Alrighty, I'm sorry, a message was being sent to me. As I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time, in between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Because last time we were here, Jane, Barney, and Simon successfully got the Holy Grail from King Arthur's days. It's an important artifact for the fight between the light and the dark. A battle that has never ended because nobody has ever truly won. No side has ever fully won. So we're going to see what happens next, considering that Great Uncle Mary, aka Gummery, has shown up at the last possible second to save the day. The sound of clapping echoed through the glossy pillars of the long museum gallery, and Simon, very pink in the face, threaded his way back to Barney and Jane through the crowd of gravely smiling scholars and dons. The crowd began to move about again, and voices rose in a general chatter all around them. A bright-eyed young man with a notebook materialized at their side. "That was a very nice speech, Simon, if I may say so. This is Jane and Barnabas, isn't it?" Simon blinked at him and nodded. "I'm from the Press Association," said the young man briskly. "Can I ask you to enlarge a check the curator presented you with?" Simon looked down at the envelope in his hand, put his finger nervously in the flap, and tore it open. He took out the neatly folded check and gazed at it for several moments, and without a word passed it across to Jane. Jane looked at it and swallowed. "It says 100 pounds. "Gosh," said Barney. "Well, that's nice," said the young man cheerfully. "Congratulations. Now then, what will you do with it?" They looked at him blankly. "I don't know," Simon said at last. "Oh, come on now," the young man persisted. "You must have some idea. What are the things you've always most wanted to buy?" The children looked at one another helplessly. "Young man," said Great Uncle Mary's deep voice beside him, "if you were suddenly presented with 100 pounds, what would you buy?" The reporter looked taken aback. "Well, Precisely," said Great Uncle Mary. "You don't know. Neither do these children. Good afternoon." "Just one more thing," said the young man, unabashed, writing rapid shorthand squiggles in his notebook. "What were you actually doing when you found that thing?" "The Grail, you mean?" Barney said. "Well, yes, that's what you call it, isn't it?" said the young man lightly. Barney glared at him indignantly. "We just happened to be exploring a cave," Simon said hastily, "and we found it on a ledge." "Wasn't there talk of someone else having been after it?" "Moonshine," said Great Uncle Mary firmly. "Now look here. My boy, you go off and talk to the curator just over there. He knows all about it. These three have had enough excitement for one day." The young man opened his mouth to say something else, looked at Great Uncle Mary, and shut it again. He grinned amiably and disappeared into the crowd, and Great Uncle Mary steered the children into a quiet corner behind a pillar. "Well," he said, "you'll have your pictures in all the papers tomorrow. You'll be written about in books for years to come by a lot of distinguished scholarly gentlemen. And you've been given 100 pounds by one of the most famous museums in the world, and I must say you all deserve it." Which, correct me if I'm wrong, for those who know, comment below. How much is 100 pounds? Like, what is the American equivalency of that in regards from dollars to pounds? The transference. If anybody can answer that for me, because I legitimately do not know, please message me, okay? The only thing I really know about English currency is like golden sovereigns used to be a thing. I don't know if that is still a thing, but they were pretty high valued. "Gummery," Simon said thoughtfully. "I know there'd be no point in telling people the real story about finding the Grail, but wouldn't it be a good thing at least to warn them about Mr. Hastings? I mean, he got hold of Mrs. Polk and that boy Bill and made them bad, and there's nothing to stop him going around to do it to everyone." "He has gone," Great Uncle Mary said. Two owl-like men in heavy spectacles passing bowed respectfully to him, and he nodded vaguely. I know, but he might come back. Great Uncle Mary looked down at the long gallery. Over their heads, an old, closed look came back into his face. When he does come back, he said, it will not be as Mr. Hastings. Wasn't his name really Hastings at all? Simon said curiously. I've known him to use many different names, Great Uncle Mary said, at many different times. Jane slid one foot unhappily to and fro over the smooth marble floor. It seems so awful that a vicar should be so bad. He must have been kidding all the bishops and things into thinking he was good, Simon said, same as he kidded everyone in Thruisic. Not at all, Great Uncle Mary said. Simon stared at him. But he must have. I mean, they must have heard him preaching sermons on Sundays. No one heard him preach on Sundays, and I doubt if he has ever met a bishop in his life. Now they were all staring at him, in such baffled amazement that the sides of the mouth twitched into a half-smile. It's quite simple. What they call the power of suggestion. Our Mr. Hastings was not the vicar of Thruisic, nor anything to do with him. I know the real vicar slightly. He is a tall man as well, though rather thin and about 70 years old. His name is Smith. But Mr. Hastings lived in the vicarage, Barney said. It was the vicarage once. Now it's let out to anyone who wants to rent it. The parish council decided years ago that it was much too big for Mr. Smith to live alone in it, like a pea in a pod, and they found him a little cottage on the other side of the church. And when I went to find him, Jane said slowly, trying to remember, I didn't ask anyone where he lived. I just said to an old man by the church, is that the vicarage? And all he said was, yes. He was a rather bad-tempered old man, I think. Do you know, Gummery? I don't think Mr. Hastings actually told me he was the vicar. I just took it for granted when he said something about his replacing Mr. Hawsmeller there. But he must have known. I thought he was. Oh yes, he wasn't going to disillusion you until he found out what you were up to. He knew perfectly well who you were. Did he really? From the moment he opened the front door. Oh, said Jane. She thought about it and felt cold. Oh. So from that moment, we all went on thinking he was the vicar, Simon said, and if ever we mentioned him to anybody like Mr. Penhallow, they must have thought we met the real vicar. But Gummery, didn't you know? Great Uncle Mary chuckled. No, that's what I thought as well. For some time, well, right up to the last, I entertained the most terrible suspicions of the poor, harmless Mr. Smith. Barney said unexpectedly, but you've been up against Mr. Hastings before. Surely you couldn't mistake anybody else for him. He changes, Great Uncle Mary said vaguely, deliberately looking away again. There is no knowing what he will look like. And there was a finality in the ring of his voice that forbade any further question, as they knew there would always be when they tried to ask more about the mysterious enemy of their days in Thruisic. This was one of the things from Great Uncle Mary's secret world, and even though they had been so much involved, they knew he would keep his secrets, as he always had. Simon looked down at the check in his hand. We found the Grail, he said, and everyone seems frightfully excited about it, but it isn't any use on its own, is it? The Cornishman said if whoever found it had any other words from him on the second manuscript that we didn't even have a chance to look at, then they'd be able to understand what was written on the Grail and know the secret of it all. But we shan't ever know because the manuscripts are at the bottom of the sea. Barney said gloomily, We failed, really. Great Uncle Mary said nothing, and when they looked up at him, hearing only the hum of voices from the crowd, he seemed to be towering over them as tall and still as the pillar at his side. Failed? He said, and he was smiling. Oh, no. Is that really what you think? You haven't failed. The hunt for the Grail was a battle as important in its way as any battle that's ever been fought, and you won it, the three of you. The powers behind the man calling himself Hastings came from very near to winning, and what that victory would have meant if the secret of the Grail had been given into their hands is more than anyone dare think. But thanks to you, the vital secret, they needed is safe from them still, for as many centuries perhaps as it was before. Safe, not destroyed, Simon. The first manuscript, your map, will certainly have disintegrated at once in the sea, but that was no more use to anyone once it had led you to the second. And the Grail, It might have been made by colleagues even more excited. He glanced around the room and chuckled. That's no matter. The point is that the second manuscript, down under the sea, is sealed up in its case, which will resist seawater indefinitely if it's made of lead. So the last secret is safe and hidden, so well hidden at the bottom of Thruisic Bay that they could never even begin the long business of searching for it without our being able to find out and to stop them. They've lost their chance. And so have we, Simon said bitterly, seeing again the picture they had never properly left his mind. He thought of the glinting brass telescope case with both manuscripts sealed inside, flying from his desperate hand, and then only yards from Great Uncle Mary's safe grasp, jerked away from the raised oar to break and plunge its contents forever into the sea. No, we haven't, said Jane unexpectedly. She was thinking of the same moment, and she was out of the cold marble vastness of the museum back on Kamar Head in the excitement in the scorching sun. We do know where it is. I was standing by the only thing that could mark it, that deep pool in the rocks. I was just on the edge, and the lead case went down right in front of me, so we should know where to look for it if we ever went back. For a moment, Great Uncle Mary looked really alarmed. I had no idea of that. Then the others will have noticed the same thing, and they will be able to go straight to the spot, dive for the manuscript, and be away with it before anyone is ever even to notice they are there. No, they won't, Jane said, pink and earnest. That's the best thing of all, Gummery. You see, we only noticed the pool in the first place because we came across it when the tide was at its lowest. By the time we were on our way back to the beach, the water had covered it again. Mr. Withers fell into it, but he didn't know he had, so if there was ever a tide as low as that again, we should be able to look for the pool and find the second manuscript. But the enemy wouldn't because they don't know about the pool at all. Can we go back? Simon said eagerly. Can we go back, Gummery, and have someone dive for it? One day, perhaps, Great Uncle Mary said, and then before he could say any more, a group of men from the murmuring crowd all around them and turned towards them. Ah, Professor Lyon, if you have a moment, might I introduce you to Dr. Theodore Reisenstadt? I'm a great, great disciple of yours. An intense little man with a beard said to Great Uncle Mary as he took his head, Merriman Lyon is a name much honored in my country. Come on, Simon said in an undertone, and the children slipped away to stand on the edge of the crowd while the bald heads and gray beards wagged and chattered solemnly. They looked across the shimmering floor to the lone glass case where the grail stood like a golden star. Barney was gazing into space as if were coming out of a trance. Wake up, Jane said cheerfully. Barney said slowly, Is that his real name? Whose name? Great Uncle Mary. Is he really called Merriman? Well, of course, that's what Mary is short for. I didn't know, Barney said. I always thought Mary was a nickname. Merriman Lyon. Funny name, isn't it? Simon said lightly. Come on, let's go and have another look at the grail. I want to see what it says about us again. He moved around the edge of the crowd with Jade, but Barney stared and stayed where he was. Merriman Lyon, he said softly to himself. Mary Lyon. Merlion. Merlin. He looked across the room to where Great Uncle Mary's white hair towered over the rest, slightly bent as he listened to what someone else was saying. My apologies for tripping up on my words. The angular brown face seemed more than ever like an old carving, deep eyes shadowed and mysterious above the fierce nose. No, Barney said aloud, and he shook himself. It's not possible. But as he followed Simon and Jane, he glanced back over his shoulder, wondering, and Great Uncle Mary, as if he knew, turned his head and looked him full in the face for an instant, across the crowd, smiled very faintly, and looked away again. All the way up the immense gallery, over its glistening stone floor, row upon row of identical glass cases stretched into the distance, with pots, daggers, coins, strange twisted pieces of bronze and leather, and wood all shut quiet inside like butterflies caught on pins. The case which held the grail was taller than the rest, a high glass box in a place of honor in the center of the great gallery, with nothing inside it but the one shining cup, gleamed now to brilliant gold, poised on a heavy black plinth. A neat silver square beneath was engraved with the words, Gold chalice of unknown Celtic workmanship, believed 6th century, found in Thruisic, South Cornwall, and presented by Simon, Jane, and Barnabas Drew. They moved around the case, looking at the grail. Its curved, engraved sides had been meticulously cleaned, and now that the beaten gold was free of the dirt left by centuries in the cave under Kamar Head, every line of the engraving was clear. They saw that it was divided into 5 panels, and that 4 of the 5 were covered with pictures of men fighting, brandishing swords and spears, crouching behind shields, dressed not in armor but in strange tunics ending above their knees. They wore helmets on their heads, but the helmets curving down over the backs of their necks were like no shape the children had ever seen before. Between the figures interweaving like pictures on a tapestry, words and letters were closely engraved. The last panel, the 5th, was completely covered in words as close written as the scrawled black lines that had been on the manuscript. But all these words on the Golden Grail the children knew were in a language nobody from a great Uncle Mary to the museum experts had been able to understand. Behind them, they heard 2 men from the crowd come up deep in conversation, looking down into the glass case. Quite unique. Of course, the significance of the inscription is difficult to estimate. Clearly runic. I think strange in a Roman ambience. But my dear fellow, the second man's voice was loud and jolly, glancing round. Barney saw that he was red-faced, enormous beside his small, bespectacled companion. Emphasizing the runic element surely presupposes some Saxon connection, and the whole essence of this thing is Celtic. Romano-Celtic, if you like, but consider the Arthurian evidence. Arthurian? Said the first voice in nasal disbelief. I should have greater proof for that than Professor Lyon's imaginative surmise. Loomis, I think, would have grave doubts, but indeed a remarkable find nonetheless. Remarkable. They moved again into the crowd. What on earth did that all mean? Said Jane. Does he believe it's about King Arthur? Barney glared resentfully after the little man. Then they heard voices from another group passing the showcase. Surely all the theories will have to be revised now. It throws a new light on the entire Arthurian canon. The voice was as solemn as the rest, but younger, and then it chuckled. Poor old Battersby, all his vaporings about Scandinavian analogues, and now here's the first evidence since Nennius of a Celtic Arthur, a real king. The times ask for a peace, you know, said a deeper voice. Oh, really? Did you do that? Bit strong, wasn't it? A fine to shake the whole field of English scholarship. Not at all, said the deeper voice. It's undoubtedly genuine, and it undoubtedly gives clues to the identity of Arthur, and as such it can't be overpraised. I'm only sorry about the last panel. Yes, the mysterious inscription. A cipher, I think. It must be. Those strange old English characters. Runic, old Battersby claims. Absurd, of course. Personally, I'm sure there was once a key to them, lost long ago, of course, so we shall never know. The voices faded like the rest. Well, that sounds better, Simon said. They all seem to treat it as a kind of relic, Jane said sadly. I suppose it's what Gummery said. That the real meaning of it wouldn't have been known unless the enemy had got hold of it, and then it would have been too late. Well, the enemy can come and look at it as much as they like now, said Simon, but it won't mean anything to them without the manuscript. I suppose that was the key to the ciphers in the last panel that the man was talking about just now. Jane sighed. And it won't mean anything to us either, so we shan't know the real truth about King Arthur, about the... What did the manuscript call him? The Pendragon. Arthur Pendragon. Yeah. Which, one day, we are definitely going to read Once and Future King by T.H. White, and Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. All of those Arthurian legends are books that I want to read for you all this year. The difficulty is finding a version of it that is not so heavily abridged that it's too difficult for younger audiences. So please bear with me on that. This is a bit easier because this is a fantasy. This is a story made for young adults and children. So I will find a version of The Once and Future King, which is an amazing read. I read it as a kid, as well as the subsequent books after that. No, we shan't know exactly who he was or what happened to him. We shan't know what his secret was that Gummery talked about and the enemy wanted. We shan't know about the other odd thing the manuscript said. The day when the Pendragon shall come again. Barney, listening to them, looked again at the mysterious words engraved on the gleaming side of the grail, and he raised his head to stare across the room at great Uncle Mary's tall figure with the great white head and fierce secret face. "I think we shall know," he said slowly. "One day." And that is the end of Book 1 of The Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper, Over Sea, Under Stone. And now, next week, we will begin the second book, which is, out of the 5, this is probably the first favorite out of the 5. There's another book in the series that is a favorite, and it's technically the 4th book, but I can't wait to read it for you all. It's going to be great. It's an overarching story. We're going to get a new cast of characters that we're going to get comfortable with, and it's going to be great. And I cannot wait for you all to experience that. I love you all very, very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.